The Billionaire Factory: How Ultra-Wealth is Made. In 2025, for the first time in human history, the number of billionaires surpassed 3,000 people worldwide. Together, those 3,000 individuals own $18.3 trillion. The world's 12 richest billionaires together have more wealth than the poorer half of all humanity, and that's more than 4 billion people. And here is the fact that should make you think the most. 60% of that extreme wealth does not come from effort, from work, or from innovation. It comes from inheritance, from political cronyism, or from pure, hard monopoly power. In this episode, I explain exactly how a billionaire is manufactured in the 21st century and why it is no longer just an economic problem, but a direct threat to democracy. For a long time, the dominant narrative about extreme wealth was one of individual effort. Someone had a brilliant idea, worked hard, took risks, and became a billionaire through personal merit. It's an appealing story. It's the story Hollywood has told 1,000 times, and according to the most recent data, it is, in most cases, a false story. In this episode, we're going to dismantle that narrative with concrete data and understand why the extreme wealth concentration we're experiencing in 2026 is not just a curious economic phenomenon. It is, according to the organizations that study it most rigorously, a direct and measurable threat to the stability of democracies worldwide. Let's start with the scale of the phenomenon, because the speed at which it's happening is as important as its absolute size. According to the Oxfam report published on January 19th of 2026, coinciding with the start of the World Economic Forum in Davos, billionaires' combined wealth worldwide grew more than 16% during 2025, reaching a historic high of $18.3 trillion. That figure represents growth 3 times faster than the average annual rate of the previous 5 years. Since March of 2020, the start of the coronavirus pandemic, the combined wealth of the world's billionaires has grown 81% adjusted for inflation. To understand that speed in human terms, billionaires' wealth grew, on average, $491,000 every single day during 2025. A worker earning minimum wage would need 102 years of uninterrupted work to accumulate that same amount of money, what a billionaire earns, on average, in a single day. Elon Musk became, during this period, the first person in history to surpass the $500 billion mark in individual net worth. And according to current Oxfam projections, based on accumulation trends observed over the past decade, the world will have its first trillionaire, someone with a full $1 trillion in net worth, within approximately 10 years, if current trends continue without structural change. Meanwhile, the other side of the global economic equation tells a radically different story. According to the same report, nearly half the world's population lives on less than $8.3 a day, and 1 in 4 people on the planet currently faces moderate or severe food insecurity, a proportion that increased 42.6% between 2015 and 2024. Here we arrive at the data point that most directly contradicts the popular narrative about how great fortunes are built. According to Oxfam analysis, most of the world's billionaire wealth is not the result of individual effort or genuine entrepreneurial innovation. 60% of that extreme wealth is directly inherited or marked by dynamics of cronyism and institutional corruption, or directly linked to monopoly power, meaning the ability of a company to eliminate real competition and set prices without effective market restraints. The case of Latin America and the Caribbean illustrates this with particular clarity. According to the same report, more than half of the region's billionaires, exactly 53.8%, are billionaires because they inherited their fortune in total or in part, not because they built it from scratch. The combined wealth of Latin American billionaires grew 39% in a single year, reaching $622 billion, a figure equivalent to the combined gross domestic product of Chile and Peru together. This pattern completely breaks with the meritocratic narrative traditionally used to justify extreme inequality. We are not talking, in most documented cases, about entrepreneurs who started from zero and built empires through pure innovation. We are talking, in a majority proportion, about the intergenerational transmission of already existing fortunes, combined with privileged access to capital political connections, and dominant market positions that are extraordinarily difficult to replicate for anyone starting out without those pre-existing structural advantages. There is a dimension of extreme wealth concentration that is particularly concerning because it directly affects society's ability to understand what's happening, control over media outlets, and digital platforms. According to Oxfam, more than half of the world's largest media companies are directly owned by billionaires. And concentration is even more extreme in the digital realm. Just 6 billionaires run 9 of the world's 10 largest social media platforms. 8 of the 10 largest artificial intelligence companies, a sector closely tied to media and increasingly central to how millions of people receive information, are run by billionaires. And just 3 of those companies control nearly 90% of the entire global market for generative artificial intelligence chatbots. The report documents concrete, verifiable cases of this trend: the acquisition of the Washington Post by Jeff Bezos, Amazon's founder, the purchase of Twitter, rebranded as X by Elon Musk, the acquisition of the Los Angeles Times by Patrick Soon-Shiong, and the purchase of a considerable percentage of shares in The Economist magazine by a consortium of billionaires. A University of California study documented that, in the months following Elon Musk's acquisition of X, hate speech on that platform increased by approximately 50%. This is not an isolated or anecdotal data point. It is evidence of how a single individual's control over mass communication infrastructure can measurably and rapidly alter the tone and content of public debate consumed daily by millions of people. This is, according to Oxfam's own report, the most alarming part of the entire phenomenon. Extreme wealth no longer stays contained within the purely economic sphere. It translates increasingly directly and measurably into real political power. According to Oxfam's calculations, a billionaire is approximately 4,000 times more likely to hold political office than any ordinary citizen. The case of the 2024 United States presidential election offers concrete evidence of this phenomenon. 1 out of every $6 spent by all candidates, parties, and political committees in that election came from donations made by just 100 billionaire families. A World Value Survey, conducted across 66 different countries, found that nearly half of respondents worldwide perceive that the wealthiest individuals in their country routinely buy national election outcomes. That perception is not a coincidence or unfounded paranoia. Oxfam documents that billionaires have built their political power primarily through 3 identifiable mechanisms: directly buying political support through massive donations, systematically investing and legitimizing economic elites' power in the eyes of public opinion, and securing direct, privileged access to government institutions that, in theory, should be regulating them. The consequences of this dynamic are measurable in concrete democratic indicators. Countries with higher levels of economic inequality are 7 times more likely to experience significant democratic backsliding, whether through erosion of the rule of law or direct manipulation of electoral processes. In 2024, for the 19th consecutive year, a measurable deterioration in democratic indicators was recorded worldwide, with documented restrictions on freedom of expression in roughly a quarter of all countries on the planet, and more than 142 mass protests against governments recorded in 68 different countries during that single year. Oxfam and other organizations that study this phenomenon rigorously don't limit themselves to just documenting the problem. They also propose a set of concrete, technically grounded measures to reverse the trend before it becomes structurally and irreversibly entrenched. The first proposal is implementing effective taxation agendas specifically targeting the super rich, with the explicit goal of reducing their disproportionate economic power. For example, through broad-based income and wealth taxes, the tax rate's high enough to generate a real, measurable effect on extreme inequality rather than merely symbolic taxes. The second proposal involves strengthening what experts call firewalls between private wealth concentration and institutional political power, strict regulation of lobbying groups, effective limits on campaign financing by large individual fortunes, reinforced guarantees of editorial independence for media outlets, and explicit prohibitions against hate speech algorithmically amplified on digital platforms controlled by these same actors. The third proposal seeks to guarantee effective political empowerment for civil society organizations, labor unions, and organized citizens in general, For example, through reinforced protection of fundamental freedoms of association, peaceful assembly, and freedom of expression, which would allow effectively counterbalancing the disproportionate influence concentrated money currently exerts over democratic processes in practically the entire world. The narrative of the self-made billionaire who built their fortunes solely through exceptional talent and hard work remains culturally powerful, but the data available in 2026 tells a considerably different and much more complex story, one where inheritance, privileged access to capital, political connections, and monopoly power explain a majority portion of the extreme wealth we observe today. This does not mean individual merit and personal effort don't exist, or that no fortune has ever been genuinely built from scratch through real innovation. It means that, as an aggregate, globally measurable phenomenon, the extreme wealth concentration we are witnessing looks much more like intergenerational transmission of pre-existing structural advantages than the meritocratic story habitually used to justify it in public opinion. And when that extreme wealth translates, increasingly directly and measurably, into control over media outlets, the digital platforms that shape public opinion, and ultimately into institutional political influence, it stops being exclusively a matter of economic inequality. It becomes, according to the available evidence, a fundamental question about who really decides the rules the rest of us have to live by.